I am Tessa, 33 years old, and my family just handed over a small fortune to remind me that I mean absolutely nothing to them. They gave my sister $400,000 for a destination wedding and looked me dead in the eye to say I did not deserve a single dime of help. I turned my back and walked away for good. 2 years later, my sister drove past my $3 million estate and called my mother, sobbing, begging to know how the family failure ended up owning the entire neighborhood. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family that constantly belittled your worth. The bass from the live jazz band thumped against the crystal chandeliers of the Oakwood Country Club. It was the kind of venue my father William preferred, a place where wealth was loud and status was everything. Tonight was the engagement party for my younger sister Madison and her fiancé Trey. Waiters carried silver trays of champagne through a sea of guests dressed in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. I stood near the back wearing a simple gray business suit that felt completely out of place among the silk and sequins. My mind was not on the celebration. It was entirely consumed by the fact that my business was exactly 48 hours away from total collapse. For 3 years, I had poured every ounce of my energy into building a business-to-business software platform designed to audit and streamline corporate supply chains. I wrote the code myself. I pitched the clients myself. I survived on cheap coffee and 4 hours of sleep a night. But a massive delay in client payments had left me completely out of runway. If I did not pay my server hosting fees by Monday morning, my platform would go offline. My clients would leave, and my company would die. I needed a bridge loan of $50,000 to survive the month. It was a fraction of what my father spent on his vintage car collection, and I fully intended to pay it back with interest. I spotted William holding court near the ice sculpture. At 62, he was a real estate developer who still operated like an old-school tycoon, valuing aggressive handshakes and golf course deals over actual innovation. I approached him, my heart hammering against my ribs, and asked if we could step into the hallway for a private word. He sighed heavily, excusing himself from his friends with a roll of his eyes that told everyone I was already a burden. We stepped into the quiet corridor lined with oil paintings of former club presidents. "What is it, Tessa?" he asked, checking his gold watch. "Madison is about to make her toast, and I need to be there." I swallowed my pride and laid out my situation quickly and professionally. I explained the delayed receivables. I explained the server costs. I asked for the $50,000 loan and offered him a signed promissory note guaranteeing a high interest return within 60 days. William stared at me for a long moment before letting out a sharp, condescending laugh. It echoed off the marble walls, making me feel incredibly small. "A promissory note from a failing company is just a piece of paper," he said, shaking his head. "I told you 3 years ago that this little typing hobby of yours was a waste of time. You sit in your apartment staring at a screen all day pretending to be a CEO. Real business requires tangible assets. Real business requires charm and presence, two things you severely lack." I felt my hands ball into fists at my sides. "It is not a hobby, Dad," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I have secured 3 major contracts this quarter. The revenue is coming. I just need a bridge loan to keep the infrastructure running until the invoices clear. It is a temporary cash flow issue. If you were running a real business, you would not have cash flow issues." He dismissed, turning his back halfway toward the door. "Look at your future brother-in-law. Trey understands how money works. He understands the modern market." Right on cue, the heavy oak doors swung open. Trey and Madison walked into the hallway. Trey was a charismatic African-American man who wore his bespoke suits with effortless confidence. He presented himself as a high-rolling Silicon Valley tech investor, constantly throwing around buzzwords about cryptocurrency and disruptive blockchain algorithms. My father absolutely adored him. Trey spoke the language of easy money, which appealed perfectly to my father's greedy nature. Madison clung to his arm, wearing a custom gown that probably cost more than my entire server bill. William's entire demeanor transformed. The cold, judgmental scowl he wore for me vanished, replaced by a warm, expansive smile. "There is the man of the hour," William boomed, stepping past me to clap Trey on the shoulder. "I was just telling Tessa here how a real entrepreneur operates." Trey flashed a perfectly white smile, adjusting his silk tie. "It is all about mindset, William. You have to project success to attract success." He glanced at my worn gray suit and chuckled softly. "No offense, Tessa, but you have to spend money to make money. You cannot build an empire from your living room in last season's clothes." William pulled his leather checkbook from his inner jacket pocket. He uncapped his luxury fountain pen and began writing against the wall. I watched in stunned silence as he filled out the lines. He ripped the check from the pad and handed it directly to Trey. "This is for the wedding," William announced proudly. $400,000. I want that ceremony in Lake Como to be the event of the decade. I want my daughter to have the absolute best, and I know you two will use any leftover funds to grow your incredible portfolio." Madison squealed, throwing her arms around our father's neck. "Thank you, Daddy. It is going to be a fairy tale." Too. William hugged her back, then looked right over her shoulder, meeting my eyes with a chilling deadpan expression. "You see, Tessa?" he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, meant only for me. "I invest in winners. I invest in people who bring value to this family name. Your little software hobby is a money pit. You do not deserve any help." The sheer cruelty of my father's words paralyzed me. He had just handed $400,000 to a man who had never proven a single financial return simply because Trey played the part of a successful risk-taker. Meanwhile, my father refused to loan his own daughter a fraction of that amount to save a legitimate functioning business. I stood perfectly still, the jazz music from the ballroom suddenly sounding like a mocking soundtrack to my humiliation. Madison pulled back from the hug and finally looked at me. Her eyes swept up and down my sensible shoes and plain blazer. She always had a talent for making me feel like an uninvited stranger in my own family. "Oh, Tessa," she sighed with exaggerated sympathy. "Why are you always bothering Dad about your computer stuff at family events? You are ruining the aesthetic of my engagement party. We have photographers walking around and you look like you just came from a shift at a bank." I took a breath, trying to push past the suffocating tightness in my chest. "I am leaving," I said quietly. "Enjoy your check." I reached down to grab my laptop bag, which I had set against the wall. It was a sturdy, slightly scuffed leather messenger bag that carried my entire life. My source code, my client files, my entire company existed within the hard drive inside. As I bent down, Madison intentionally shifted her weight. She stumbled forward with a dramatic gasp, tilting her crystal wine glass directly over my bag. A wave of dark red Cabernet splashed across the worn leather, seeping instantly into the zippers and soaking the fabric edges. "Oops." Madison giggled, not sounding sorry in the slightest. "I guess my heels are just too high. You really should not leave your junk on the floor where people can trip over it." I dropped to my knees, frantically wiping the wine away with my bare hands, praying the liquid had not reached the laptop vents. The sticky red wine stained my palms and the cuffs of my gray blazer. I could hear Trey chuckling above me. At that exact moment, the hallway doors opened again. My mother Diana stepped out, her heavy diamond necklace catching the light. She was a woman who lived for country club gossip and social appearances, measuring a person's worth entirely by the brand of their handbag and the zip code of their house. She took one look at the scene in the hallway and her face twisted into a mask of pure disgust. "Tessa, what on earth are you doing crawling on the floor like an animal?" Diana snapped, rushing forward. She completely ignored the fact that my bag was drenched in wine. Instead, she grabbed Madison by the shoulders, inspecting her white silk dress for spots. "Did she get any on you, sweetheart?" She spilled it on my work bag. "Mom," I said, standing up and holding the dripping leather away from my clothes. "She did it on purpose." Diana turned her sharp glare on me. "Do not be ridiculous. Your sister would never ruin her own party just to spite you. Why do you always have to play the victim? You show up to the most important night of Madison's life wearing that hideous cheap suit, demanding money from your father, and now you are accusing your sister of sabotage. You are 33 years old, Tessa. It is time to stop throwing tantrums just because you are jealous. The unfairness of the accusation was staggering, but it was not new. This was the exact dynamic that had defined my entire existence. When we were teenagers, Madison had crashed my father's car and blamed it on me. Diana and William believed her without question, grounding me for 6 months. When I won a regional coding competition in high school, Diana refused to attend the awards ceremony because Madison had a minor cheerleading recital on the same day. My achievements were always invisible, while Madison's mistakes were always erased. "I am not jealous of a wedding funded by Dad's checkbook," I replied, keeping my voice dangerously level. "I just asked for a temporary loan." Diana scoffed, adjusting her diamond earrings. "A loan for what?" "That little app of yours. You have spent 3 years chasing a pipe dream while your sister has actually secured a future. Trey is building a technology empire. You are just typing in a basement. You should be asking him for a job, not begging your father for handouts." Trey stepped forward, slipping his arm around Madison's waist. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and supreme arrogance. His entire persona was a carefully constructed illusion, but my parents bought every single word of it. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a designer money clip. "Listen," Tessa, Trey said smoothly. "Your mom is right. The tech world is brutal. It takes a certain kind of aggressive instinct to survive. It is not really a space for people who cannot handle the heat. You gave it a good shot, but maybe it is time to face reality. Leave the business to the men who know how to play the game." He slid a crisp $100 bill from his clip. He stepped closer and patronizingly tucked the bill into the breast pocket of my wine-stained gray blazer. He patted my shoulder twice. "Take an Uber home," Trey said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Get some rest. Update your resume. I know a few guys at some mid-level IT firms who might need a junior project manager. I can put in a good word for you if you promise to dress a little better for the interview." Madison giggled, leaning her head against Trey's shoulder. "You are so generous, babe. She really needs the help." My father nodded in agreement, looking at Trey with absolute pride. "That is what family does, Tessa. We give you practical advice. Now clean yourself up and leave through the side exit. I do not want my business partners seeing my daughter walking through the main lobby looking like a vagrant." They stood there as a united front. My father, the arrogant traditionalist. My mother, the superficial enabler. My sister, the spoiled golden child. And my brother-in-law, the smooth-talking fraud. They looked at me as if I were a stain on their perfect family portrait. They truly believed I was a pathetic, helpless failure who would eventually come crawling back to them for an entry-level job. They believed they had completely broken my spirit. I looked down at the crisp $100 bill sticking out of my ruined blazer pocket. I looked at the dark wine dripping from my laptop bag onto the pristine marble floor. A year ago, I might have cried. I might have tried to defend my business plan or begged my mother to see reason or screamed at my sister for her petty cruelty. But standing in that hallway surrounded by their smug faces, I felt something inside me click perfectly into place. It was a complete and absolute detachment. I slowly pulled the $100 bill from my pocket. I did not throw it in Trey's face. I simply opened my fingers and let it flutter to the floor, landing right in the puddle of spilled wine. "Keep it for the honeymoon," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You are going to need it." I turned my back on them without another word. I did not look at my father's angry glare or my mother's shocked expression. I walked straight down the hallway, pushed open the heavy brass doors of the side exit, and stepped out into the freezing Connecticut night. A heavy torrential rain had started to fall. I did not run. I walked at a steady, measured pace across the dark parking lot, letting the freezing rain wash over my face and soak into my cheap suit. The cold air felt incredible. It cleared the fog of familial obligation from my mind. By the time I reached my beat-up sedan, parked in the furthest row, the last remaining shred of my desire for my parents' approval was gone. They had made their choice. Now I was going to make mine. I got into the driver's seat, slamming the door against the storm. The interior of the car was freezing. I turned on the overhead dome light and carefully unzipped my messenger bag. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out the laptop. The casing was damp, but the protective sleeve had done its job. I opened the screen and pressed the power button. The glowing logo illuminated the dark car. The machine hummed to life. My code was safe. My company was still alive. I connected my laptop to my phone's cellular hotspot. I opened my encrypted email client and pulled up a draft I had saved 3 weeks ago, but had been too terrified to send. It was addressed to a man named Bradley. Bradley was a ruthless Silicon Valley venture capitalist, known for predatory term sheets and aggressive corporate takeovers. He was a shark who devoured struggling founders. 2 months ago, he had seen my software in action during a pilot test at a major logistics firm. He had recognized the genius of my algorithm immediately and offered to buy a massive stake in my company. I had rejected his initial offer because the terms were brutal. He wanted too much equity, and I had wanted to build the company purely on my own terms. I had naively believed I could secure a traditional bank loan or a bridge loan from my family to keep my independence, but independence without capital was just a slow death. I dialed Bradley's direct number. It was nearly midnight on the East Coast, but it was only 9 o'clock in California. He answered on the second ring. Tessa Bradley's sharp voice came through the car speakers. I was wondering when you would realize you were out of options. My analysts tell me your server contracts expire on Monday. You keep good tabs on companies you do not own? I replied, staring at the rain lashing against my windshield. I keep tabs on assets I intend to acquire, he corrected smoothly. Are you ready to stop playing the struggling solo founder and let me make us both incredibly rich? I took a deep breath. The image of my father handing Trey a $400,000 check flashed in my mind. The sound of my mother calling my life's work a pipe dream echoed in my ears. I will accept your capital injection tonight, I said, my voice hard and absolute. I want $3 million in seed funding wired to my corporate account by tomorrow morning. But the terms change right now. I am not giving you the 50% equity you asked for. I will give you 40%. And I retain complete unchallengeable control of the voting board. You provide the money and the industry connections. I make the decisions. Bradley chuckled a low, predatory sound. You are in no position to negotiate terms, Tessa. You are desperate. I am highly motivated, I corrected him. And you know my software is about to disrupt the entire supply chain auditing industry. My algorithm identifies financial leaks that traditional accounting misses. If you let me go under, your competitors will buy my patents at the bankruptcy auction, and you will lose out on a billion-dollar unicorn. 40% equity, full board control. Take it or I call your rival firm right now. Silence stretched over the line. Only the sound of the rain hitting my car filled the gap. I held my breath, knowing I was playing a massive game of poker with a master. Send me the revised term sheet, Bradley finally said, the amusement gone from his voice, replaced by cold respect. I will have my legal team fast-track the digital signatures tonight. The funds will be in your account by 8 in the morning. Welcome to the major leagues, Tessa. Do not disappoint me. I hung up the phone. I quickly edited the digital term sheet, attached my cryptographic signature, and hit send. It was done. I had just sold 40% of my soul to a corporate shark, but I had saved my company. I had the capital to hire a full team, upgrade my servers, and launch my software globally. I picked up my phone and opened my contacts list. I scrolled down to William, Diana, Madison, and Trey. One by one, I tapped their names. I hit block on their phone numbers. I blocked their emails. I blocked their social media accounts. I completely and permanently severed every digital and personal tie I had to the people who shared my blood. They wanted me to be a failure. They wanted me to disappear into the background so they could shine in their fake, glittering world. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. I was going to disappear from their lives completely. I started the engine of my car. The headlights cut through the heavy rain. I pulled out of the country club parking lot, leaving my family and their toxic illusions behind me. I did not know exactly what the future held, but I knew I was never going to be the family scapegoat again. I was going to build an empire that would cast a shadow over everything my father had ever owned. 2 years passed. 2 years of ruthless execution, brutal hours, and explosive growth. 2 years of silence. And then one sunny afternoon in California, the past finally caught up with the present. 2 years passed. I did exactly what I set out to do. I built my company from a desperate startup into a dominant force in the financial auditing space. I moved to California, scaled my operations, and never looked back. But while my reality was solidifying into a massive tangible enterprise, the illusion of wealth back in Connecticut was rapidly rotting from the inside out. I would later piece together the exact anatomy of their downfall through financial records and digital audits. It was a spectacular collapse built entirely on arrogance. It started in Trey's immaculate home office. He had spent a fortune decorating the space to look like a high-powered trading floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a mahogany desk, and a 6-monitor setup displaying complex financial charts. But those monitors were no longer showing exponential growth. They were flashing red. Trey sat in his custom leather chair, sweating through his expensive dress shirt. His inbox was a war zone. Hundreds of frantic, threatening emails poured in from angry crypto investors, demanding to know why their withdrawal requests were failing. Trey was not a tech visionary. He was running a textbook Ponzi scheme wrapped in blockchain buzzwords. He had used the $400,000 check from my father to pay out a few early investors, creating a false track record of massive returns. That illusion brought in more money, which he immediately spent on luxury cars, tailored suits, and a lavish lifestyle to maintain his image as a Silicon Valley elite. Now the new investments had dried up. The market had shifted, and his house of cards was collapsing. He frantically clicked delete on emails threatening legal action and FBI investigations. He needed liquidity immediately to quiet the loudest investors. Desperation makes people reckless. Trey logged into a secure banking portal. Months earlier, he had convinced my father to grant him administrative access to the family's home equity line of credit. Trey had sold William on a fictitious exclusive high-yield liquidity pool that required temporary capital reserves. William, blinded by greed and his absolute faith in his golden son-in-law, had signed the authorization without reading the fine print. Trey began siphoning tens of thousands of dollars directly from William's property equity. He was draining the financial lifeblood of my parents' estate just to cover his immediate debts and keep himself out of prison for a few more weeks. He watched the transfer confirmation screen, his hands shaking, knowing that when William finally checked the property ledgers, the entire family would be ruined. But Trey only cared about surviving the day. While Trey was committing wire fraud in his home office, Madison was busy facing her own crushing reality. She had built an entire identity around projecting wealth on social media. Her followers believed she lived a life of uninterrupted luxury, filled with designer unboxings and 5-star vacations. That afternoon, she strutted into an exclusive boutique in downtown Greenwich. She had her eye on a limited edition leather handbag, a prop she desperately needed for an upcoming brand partnership post. She carried herself with the haughty entitlement my mother had taught her, ignoring the sales associates until she was ready to pay. She casually dropped her platinum credit card onto the glass counter. The clerk ran the card. The machine beeped a sharp negative tone. Declined. Madison offered a practiced, dismissive laugh. She told the clerk it was a simple fraud protection freeze because she traveled so much. She pulled out a secondary gold card and handed it over. The clerk swiped it again. Declined. The sales associate looked up, offering a polite but strained apology. Madison's face flushed hot red. The humiliation was instantaneous and absolute. Other wealthy patrons in the boutique turned their heads, their quiet whispers slicing through Madison's fragile ego. She snatched her cards off the counter and stormed out into the street. She immediately called Trey, screaming into the phone about the embarrassment she had just endured. She demanded to know why her accounts were frozen. Trey, operating on pure survival instinct, lied smoothly. He blamed a temporary banking restriction caused by a massive international wire transfer he was securing for his business. He promised her the funds would be available by the end of the week. But Madison could not wait until the end of the week. Her social media aesthetic demanded constant new content, and she had long ago spent her own meager savings. She could not ask our parents for handbag money without shattering the illusion that she had married a brilliant billionaire. She needed cash, and she needed it immediately. This desperation forced the golden child of the family to do something she would have previously considered a fate worse than death. She turned to manual labor. To keep up her flawless digital facade, Madison secretly signed up for a premium grocery delivery service. It was a gig economy app that catered specifically to ultra-wealthy neighborhoods and gated communities. She created a profile under a fake name, terrified that the background check might somehow leak to her country club friends. Every day while Trey was pretending to trade international stocks, Madison would drive to high-end organic markets. She wore a pulled-down baseball cap and oversized designer sunglasses, constantly checking over her shoulder to make sure no one she knew was in the parking lot. She lugged heavy cases of sparkling water and massive bags of artisanal produce to the doorsteps of sprawling mansions. It was exhausting, humiliating work for a woman who had spent her entire life looking down on service workers. But Madison turned even this degrading reality into a weapon for her social media. Whenever she delivered groceries to a particularly stunning estate, she would pause on the driveway. She would quickly take photos of the immaculate landscaping and the grand architecture. Later, she would post those photos on her own feed with vague boasting captions implying she was house hunting in exclusive zip codes or simply visiting her elite network of friends. She was literally carrying other people's groceries to survive, yet she used their homes to project an image of absolute dominance. The physical toll of the labor and the crushing constant anxiety of being discovered began to fracture her mind. She was living a double life trapped in a prison of her own vanity. I did not know it at the time, but the illusion my family had built was about to collide violently with my reality. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was standing in the grand entryway of my Bel Air estate, a property I had purchased entirely in cash 6 months after my software platform hit a $150 million valuation. I was wearing a custom-tailored ivory suit, a vintage Rolex on my wrist, and I was deep in conversation with my lead architect. We were discussing plans to extend the infinity pool toward the canyon edge. As my assistant opened the massive custom iron doors for us to step outside, a loud crash echoed across the pristine white stone driveway. I paused, looking down the steps. A delivery driver had dropped a heavy glass bottle of imported sparkling water. The liquid was bubbling over the hot stones, mixing with shattered green glass. I did not see the driver. They had apparently vanished, abandoning 2 canvas grocery bags on my front steps. "Just leave it," I told my assistant, waving a hand dismissively. "Call the estate cleaning service to clear the driveway. I need to review the third quarter acquisition figures before my next board meeting. Let us head back inside." I thought nothing of it. It was just a clumsy delivery driver who got spooked. But 2 days later, my head of security flagged a bizarre anomaly on the perimeter surveillance footage. He pulled up the high-definition video on his tablet and handed it to me. The footage showed a leased Mercedes with expired Connecticut plates pulling up to my security gates. A woman stepped out hauling heavy grocery bags. When the camera zoomed in on her face, I felt a sharp, cold spike of recognition. It was Madison, my golden child sister, the woman who had intentionally ruined my laptop bag with a glass of red wine, was currently working under a fake name as a gig economy grocery driver. The footage showed her reaching the top of my steps just as my front door opened. I watched on the screen as sheer terror washed over her face. I saw her drop the bottle, scramble backward like a frightened animal, and dive behind a massive stone pillar to hide from me. The cameras caught her hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she pressed herself against the stone. Once I retreated inside, she sprinted back to her car, ignoring the broken glass, and peeled out of the driveway as if she were running for her life. I did not have to guess what happened next. The frantic digital trail my family left behind was later subpoenaed during our court battles, painting a pathetic and hilarious picture of their meltdown. Madison had pulled over on a narrow shoulder just outside my gated community. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely dial her phone. She bypassed Trey entirely, knowing his empty promises of crypto wealth would only enrage her. She called our mother. According to the phone records and Diana's own tearful admissions later, Madison was completely hysterical. She screamed into the phone that she had just seen me. She cried that I was not a maid, not a consultant, but the owner of a $3 million estate. She described my tailored suit, my architect, and my security detail. Diana, sitting in her country club lounge, initially scoffed. She told Madison she was being dramatic, insisting that my software company was a failure and that I could not even afford a closet in Bel Air. But Madison's absolute panic finally pierced through Diana's wall of denial. Diana rushed home to William's study. She breathlessly relayed the story. William, arrogant and completely certain of my incompetence, laughed. He booted up his computer, opened his commercial real estate databases, and aggressively typed my name into the search bar, intending to prove Madison wrong. Instead, the screen flooded with undeniable reality. Forbes, TechCrunch, and the Wall Street Journal all populated the first page of results. The headlines were brutal for a man who had called my business a money pit. They read, "Tessa's auditing platform hits $150 million valuation." They detailed how I had sold 40% of my company to a major Silicon Valley venture capital firm while retaining absolute board control. They highlighted my upcoming acquisition talks with global tech conglomerates. The color drained entirely from William's face. The daughter he had discarded, degraded, and pushed out into the freezing rain with a single $100 bill was now worth more than his entire family lineage combined. Madison, still on speakerphone from her sweltering car, wailed pathetically. The silence that filled my father's study was not born of regret. They did not feel guilty for how they had treated me. They felt robbed. In their twisted, narcissistic minds, my wealth was a resource they had somehow been wrongfully denied. William's shock quickly mutated into aggressive, predatory greed. His own real estate business was suffocating under a mountain of toxic commercial debt. His credit rating was hovering at junk status. Trey's crypto investments had completely evaporated, and Trey had secretly drained William's home equity line of credit to cover his tracks. They were all standing on the absolute edge of financial ruin. And there I was, sitting on a mountain of cash. William slammed his fist onto his mahogany desk, declaring that I had built my company on his dime. He actually convinced himself that because he had paid for my private high school tuition and bought my first coding laptop 15 years ago, the family was legally entitled to my corporate equity. Trey, desperate to save himself from federal wire fraud charges, eagerly fueled this delusion. Trey manipulated William, insisting that my success was a family asset and that they needed to intervene before I sold the company. Diana wiped away her shock and smiled greedily. She completely forgot the horrible things she had said to me 2 years prior. She suddenly decided that I owed them for the foundation they had supposedly provided. They convinced themselves that I was just a naive girl who had gotten lucky and that they could easily intimidate me into handing over control of my finances. William booked 4 first-class tickets to Los Angeles on credit. They packed their designer luggage, fueled by the absolute audacity of their entitlement. They were going to fly to California, ambush me at my estate, and demand a massive slice of my empire. They believed they could just walk back into my life, play the family card, and take what they wanted. They had no idea they were walking directly into a slaughterhouse. The heavy mahogany doors of William's study remained firmly shut, sealing the family inside a room that suddenly felt suffocatingly small. William paced the length of his antique Persian rug, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. He had summoned Trey to the office the moment he saw the Forbes article on his monitor, demanding an emergency family meeting. The 4 of them now occupied the space, a line of panicked, desperate people, waiting for their patriarch to formulate a concrete plan. The air was thick with a suffocating tension. William stopped pacing and turned to face them, his face pale and slick with a cold sweat. He slammed his hand down on the edge of his massive desk, causing a crystal whiskey decanter to rattle violently against the polished wood. "I am completely ruined," William announced, his voice stripped of its usual booming arrogance. It was a harsh, gravelly whisper that sent a shockwave through the room. Diana gripped the armrest of the sofa, her diamond rings digging into the dark leather. Madison let out a sharp gasp, her eyes darting between her parents. For decades, William had projected the image of an untouchable real estate tycoon, a man whose wealth was as solid as the concrete buildings he developed. But the reality hidden behind shell companies and creative accounting was a total disaster. His commercial real estate empire was suffocating under a mountain of toxic debt. 3 of his major development projects had completely stalled, bleeding millions in interest every single month. His credit rating was practically non-existent. The banks were preparing to call in their loans, and when they did, the entire facade would collapse. They would lose the country club memberships, the luxury cars, and the very house they were sitting in right now. Trey sat completely still, swallowing hard. He knew exactly how bad the financial situation was because he was the one actively accelerating the collapse. Trey's own fraudulent crypto trading scheme had completely imploded over the weekend. Desperate to keep his angry investors from going to the authorities, Trey had secretly drained William's home equity line of credit just weeks prior. He had siphoned the last drop of liquidity the family possessed to cover his own criminal tracks. If William dug deep enough into the ledgers to figure out how to save his failing business, he would discover the missing funds. Trey would not just lose his luxury lifestyle, he would go to federal prison. He needed a massive distraction, and he needed a massive influx of cash immediately. Trey stood up, straightening his tailored suit jacket, instantly slipping into his smooth, charismatic salesman persona. He walked over to William's desk, looking at the glowing computer screen that still displayed the article about Tessa's staggering success. "William, you are looking at this all wrong," Trey said, his voice dripping with absolute confidence. "This is not a crisis. This is our ultimate salvation. Look at the screen. Tessa just secured a $150 million valuation. She is swimming in liquid capital. And more importantly, she did not build that massive empire in a vacuum. She built it entirely on your dime." William frowned, his brow furrowing, as he tried to follow Trey's logic. "What exactly are you talking about? I never gave her a single cent for that company. I specifically and totally refused to loan her the money 2 years ago. I told her it was a pipe dream." Trey let out a soft, patronizing chuckle, placing both hands firmly on the desk. "You are thinking too small, William. You are thinking like a father, not a venture capitalist. You provided the ultimate seed funding. Think about it. You paid for her exclusive private high school education. You funded her entire childhood. Most importantly, who bought her the very first computer she ever used to write code? You did. You provided the essential hardware and the educational foundation that made her software platform possible. In the tech world, early investors are entitled to substantial equity. You are her original angel investor." The sheer absurdity of the argument should have been obvious. Claiming a stake in a massive corporate enterprise because a parent bought a teenager a laptop 15 years ago was legally laughable. But desperation breeds delusion. William was staring down the barrel of total bankruptcy. He needed an a lifeline to preserve his ego and his estate. He looked at Trey, the gears turning in his head, as he desperately grasped at the lifeline Trey was spinning out of thin air. "You are entirely right," William muttered, his posture straightening, as the familiar arrogant bluster began to return to his voice. "I gave her the tools. I put a roof over her head while she developed her skills. She used family resources to build that algorithm. That makes the software family property. She owes this family for the foundation we gave her. It is completely unacceptable for her to hoard that kind of wealth while the family business faces a temporary cash flow issue." Diana, who had been listening in stunned silence, slowly stood up. The panicked socialite vanished instantly, replaced by a woman calculating her next major payout. Her eyes glinted with a predatory, ravenous greed. She completely erased the memory of calling her daughter a pathetic failure. She conveniently forgot how she had watched Trey tuck a crumpled $100 bill into Tessa's wine-stained blazer. The only thing Diana saw now was a $150 million piggy bank with her name on it. She absolutely owes us. Diana agreed, her voice turning cold and sharp. We raised her. We sacrificed for her. She cannot simply abandon her own flesh and blood. It is time we remind her where she comes from. It is time for a family reunion. Pack your bags immediately. We are loading the Porsche to ambush Tessa and collect our massive corporate equity right now. The chime of my private security console cut through the quiet hum of my home office. I glanced up from the quarterly revenue projections glowing on my monitor to the bank of high-definition surveillance screens mounted on the wall. A silver Porsche Panamera was idling at the base of my driveway, completely dwarfed by the massive 12-foot custom iron gates that protected my Bel Air estate. I zoomed in on the driver's side window. It was William. Sitting next to him, applying a fresh coat of lipstick in the visor mirror, was Diana. Crammed into the back seats were Madison and Trey. The entire toxic circus had crossed the country and arrived at my doorstep. A red light flashed on my desk console. My head of security, Marcus, spoke through the internal channel. Ms. Wilson, we have an unannounced vehicle at the primary gate. The driver claims to be your father. He says it is an emergency family visit. Do you want me to dispatch the patrol and have them escorted off the premises? I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, resting my chin on my hands. 2 years ago, the mere sight of my father's car would have sent my heart hammering into my ribs. I would have felt the familiar, suffocating panic of never being good enough. Now, staring at the screen, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical curiosity. I wanted to see exactly how far their delusions stretched. I wanted to look them in the eye and watch them try to execute whatever pathetic scheme had brought them 3,000 miles from their Connecticut country club. Do not send the patrol. I told Marcus, my voice perfectly level. Open the gates. Let them drive up to the main entrance. I will receive them in the grand atrium. Make sure the perimeter cameras record every second of their arrival. I watched the iron gates swing silently outward. William hit the gas, and the Porsche surged forward, crawling up the serpentine white stone driveway lined with imported Italian cypress trees and cascading water features. I tracked their progress from camera to camera. When they parked near the front entrance, the 4 of them stepped out of the vehicle. It was a masterclass in transparent greed. William stood by the car door, his eyes scanning the architecture, his jaw working as he mentally calculated the square footage. His real estate developer brain was trying to price the property, and the sheer magnitude of the number was clearly making him dizzy. Diana was practically vibrating, her eyes wide as she took in the flawless landscaping and the fleet of luxury vehicles parked near the staff quarters. Trey looked visibly ill, wiping sweat from his upper lip, recognizing immediately that the wealth surrounding him was terrifyingly real, unlike the fake numbers he displayed on his home office monitors. Madison simply looked nauseous, clutching her designer handbag as if it were a life preserver, unable to reconcile the reality that the sister she had mocked was living in a paradise she could never afford. I stood up from my desk and smoothed the lapels of my suit. It was a bespoke charcoal gray power suit. It was a deliberate, sharply tailored echo of the cheap, worn-out blazer I had been wearing the night they kicked me out into the freezing rain. I walked out of my office and approached the floating glass staircase that descended into the grand atrium. Marcus had already opened the massive pivot door, allowing the 4 of them to step into the cavernous entryway. The atrium featured 30-foot ceilings, museum-quality art installations, and a wall of seamless glass that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. My family stood clustered together on the polished marble floor, looking incredibly small and entirely out of place. I began my descent down the glass stairs. The sharp click of my heels echoed through the massive space, drawing all 4 of their faces upward. Diana gasped dramatically, her face splitting into a wide, completely manufactured smile. Tessa, she cried out, her voice echoing with a sickening artificial warmth. My beautiful, brilliant girl, we have missed you so much. She rushed forward as I reached the bottom step, throwing her arms wide open, her heavy gold bracelets clanking together. She aimed for a tight maternal embrace, acting as if the last 2 years of absolute silence and the lifetime of emotional neglect had never happened. She fully expected me to fall back into my role as the desperate approval-starved daughter. I did not blink. I simply took a single deliberate step to the left. Diana, carried entirely by her own forward momentum, stumbled past me. She flailed her arms, her designer heels skidding against the polished marble, and caught herself clumsily on the edge of a custom stone console table. Her face flushed a deep, humiliating crimson as she frantically adjusted her posture. I crossed my arms over my chest, standing perfectly still, projecting absolute dominance over my domain. "You have exactly 5 minutes to state your business," I said, my voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "After that, my security team will physically remove you from the property." William stepped forward, puffing out his chest, attempting to deploy the booming patriarchal authority he used to intimidate me when I was a child. He tried to force a hearty paternal laugh, but it sounded thin and reedy in the massive space. "Is that any way to greet your family, Tessa?" he demanded, trying to mask his intimidation with outrage. "We flew across the country because we saw the news. We are here to celebrate your success." I raised my left arm, checking the face of my solid gold Rolex. 4 minutes and 45 seconds, I replied, not breaking eye contact. Trey aggressively cleared his throat, stepping in front of William. He plastered on his smooth Silicon Valley investor smile, radiating a desperate, oily charm. "Listen, Tessa." He started using his hands to emphasize his words like he was pitching a boardroom. "We know the corporate auditing space is brutal. You pulled off a massive valuation, and that is incredible. But a $150 million company needs seasoned financial management. We are here to talk about restructuring the board. We are here to talk about family equity." I tilted my head, looking at Trey as if he were a fascinating insect I had just scraped off the bottom of my shoe. "Family equity," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Yes," William boomed, stepping forward again, his greed overriding his common sense. "You built this company using the foundation I provided. I paid for your elite education. I bought the computers you used to learn how to write that code. You utilized family resources to reach this valuation. Therefore, the family is legally and morally entitled to a 40% stakeholder position in the enterprise. We are here to execute a transfer of shares." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the demand hung in the dead silence of the atrium. They were entirely serious. They truly believed they could walk into my fortress, rewrite history, and demand half of my empire based on the purchase of a childhood laptop. I looked at William, then at Diana, who was nodding eagerly, then at Madison, who was glaring at my luxury watch, and finally at Trey, whose upper lip was shining with cold sweat. Diana let out a high, ringing laugh that bounced sharply off the glass walls of the atrium. She completely ignored my coldness, treating my 5-minute warning as if it were a petulant remark from a teenager. Waving her hand dismissively, the heavy gold bracelets clanking together, she began to wander deeper into my home. Her eyes darted aggressively from the imported Italian marble under her feet to the museum-grade lighting illuminating the modern art installations. She was mentally taking inventory, but her pride demanded she tear it down. "This space is entirely too stark," Tessa Diana announced, running a highly manicured finger over the edge of a custom bronze sculpture. "It feels like a corporate lobby. It lacks warmth. When we bring some of the antique Persian rugs and mahogany sideboards from Connecticut, it will soften the room beautifully. We will hire a decent interior decorator to fix this sterile aesthetic." She spoke with the breathtaking entitlement of a conqueror, laying claim to new territory. Diana was actively pretending that my multi-million-dollar estate was merely an empty canvas waiting for her superior country club taste. She was arranging her mental furniture in a house she did not own, built by a daughter she had thrown away. I did not interrupt her. I simply let the timer on my watch tick down. Madison could not maintain the same level of blissful denial. The sheer, overwhelming reality of my wealth was crushing her fragile ego. She stared at the custom tailoring of my ivory suit and the heavy gold Rolex gleaming on my wrist. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a frantic, desperate jealousy. She marched forward, completely abandoning the casual, effortless persona she usually projected on social media. How are you affording this? Madison demanded, her voice cracking into a shrill pitch. It makes absolutely no sense, Tessa. You were begging Dad for a loan 2 years ago. You were wearing last season's clothes and crying about server fees. Now you are standing in Bel Air acting like you own the neighborhood. Are you leasing this place? Tell me the truth. You cannot possibly afford a $3 million house with that boring supply chain software. I looked at my younger sister, noting the deeply frayed edges of her presentation. The smug golden child superiority was entirely gone, replaced by the raw panic of a woman whose fake digital life was collapsing around her. I did not owe her an explanation, but her terror was fascinating to observe. Before I could address Madison's hysterical outburst, Trey stepped smoothly between us. He adjusted his silk tie, projecting the practiced, oily confidence of a man accustomed to talking his way out of disaster. He offered me a wide, blindingly white smile, completely disregarding the fact that he had once tucked a $100 bill into my pocket and told me to take an Uber home. Take it easy, Madison, Trey said smoothly, placing a calming hand on his wife's shoulder before turning his full attention to me. Tessa is playing in the big leagues now. I have to admit, Tessa, I am impressed. Securing a $150 million valuation requires a serious strategic pivot. You disrupted the market. I respect that. As a fellow tech founder, I know exactly the kind of pressure you are under right now. Scaling an operation like this requires a massive influx of operational bandwidth. Trey stepped closer, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial tone. Listen, my investment firm is relocating our primary operations to California. It is perfect timing, really. Madison and I can temporarily base our operations out of your guest wing while we finalize the purchase of our own estate. Having another seasoned executive in the house will be a massive benefit to you. We can strategize over breakfast. I can help you navigate the venture capital sharks. It is a win for everyone. He delivered the pitch with a straight face. Trey was asking to move into my home, attempting to disguise his desperate need for free housing as a generous business consultation. He was sweating heavily, the moisture beading on his forehead, despite the climate-controlled air of the atrium. He was drowning, trying to grab onto my life raft while pretending he was doing the rescuing. I am not running a boarding house for failed crypto scammers, Trey, I said, my voice cutting through his sales pitch like a steel blade. William abruptly pushed past Trey, his face flushed with dark, aggressive anger. He could not stand watching his golden son-in-law be dismissed, and he absolutely could not stand the realization that I was no longer intimidated by his presence. He squared his shoulders, planting his feet firmly on my marble floor, attempting to summon the booming patriarchal authority that had dictated our family dynamics for my entire life. That is enough of this rebellious attitude, Tessa, William commanded, pointing a thick finger directly at my chest. You have made your point. You built a profitable little app. You proved you can generate revenue. Fine. You have done well for yourself. I am a big enough man to admit when a project exceeds expectations. Your mother and I have discussed the situation extensively. We are ready to forgive your past behavior. We are willing to look past the tantrum you threw 2 years ago at your sister's engagement party. William lowered his hand, slipping it into the pocket of his tailored trousers. He spoke with the absolute certainty of a king granting a pardon to a traitor. We are here to bring you back into the fold, he announced. Running a company with a massive valuation is not a job for a solo operator. It requires legacy experience. It requires tangible business acumen. I have instructed my legal team to begin drafting the integration paperwork. We are going to fold your software platform directly into my corporate portfolio. I will take over as chairman of the board. Trey will step in as your chief financial officer. We will manage the acquisition talks together. You can stay on as a senior developer. He genuinely believed he was offering me a gift. William was standing in a house I owned outright, discussing a company I built from nothing and demanding that I hand over the keys to save his failing real estate empire. He demanded my submission as if it were his birthright. I looked down at the face of my watch. The gold hands swept silently across the dial. The 5 minutes were exactly up. The echo of William's arrogant declaration faded into the vast ceiling of the grand atrium, leaving behind a cold silence. They stood there, chests puffed and eyes gleaming with parasitic hunger, waiting for me to bow my head and hand over the keys to my kingdom. I looked at William's hand, expecting a handshake to seal his imaginary deal. I looked at Trey's smug, sweating face, Madison's frantic jealousy, and Diana's calculating glare. It was not a polite dismissal. It was a loud, chilling, uninhibited laugh that bounced sharply off the glass walls and marble floors. It was the sound of a woman who had finally realized the monsters in her closet were just pathetic shadows. My laughter cut through their manufactured confidence like a scythe. William dropped his hand, his face flushing a crimson. Diana stepped back, clutching her purse against her chest, as if my amusement were a physical threat. Trey's oily smile vanished. "You are integrating my company into your portfolio," I asked, my voice ringing with razor-sharp clarity as my laughter subsided. "You want to install Trey as my chief financial officer and take over my board. That is the grand strategy you flew 3,000 miles to pitch." I turned my back on them, an intentional display of utter disregard for their presence, and picked up my sleek silver tablet from the console table. I tapped the screen, unlocking the financial dossiers my private investigators and forensic accountants had assembled the moment Marcus flagged Madison on my security cameras days ago. I turned back around, holding the glowing screen casually in one hand. "Let us talk about your magnificent corporate portfolio, William," I said, my tone shifting from amused to aggressively clinical. "Because according to the data I pulled this morning, your portfolio is a sinking ship dragging a massive anchor of toxic debt. You have 3 commercial development projects stalled in Boston and Chicago. You are bleeding 7 figures a month in interest alone. Your holding company's credit rating was downgraded to junk status last Tuesday. 2 of your major lenders are preparing to call in their notes by the end of this quarter. If you do not liquidate your personal assets, including that house you are living in, you will be filing for chapter bankruptcy before Thanksgiving." William's jaw slackened, the color completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He opened his mouth to speak, to bluster to deny it, but his voice failed him. He knew I possessed the exact, undeniable truth. I did not give him a chance to recover. I swiped my finger across the glass screen and locked my eyes onto Trey. "And then there is our brilliant financial prodigy," I continued, my voice dripping with lethal precision. "You want to manage my $150 million valuation. Let us review your qualifications, Trey. You have 3 active IRS tax liens against your name for failing to report income over the last 4 years. Your cryptocurrency trading algorithm is nothing but a textbook Ponzi scheme, and your investors are organizing a class action lawsuit against you for wire fraud. But the best part is how you chose to keep your sinking ship afloat." Trey took a frantic step backward, raising his hands as if to physically shield himself from my words. He shook his head, his eyes darting toward William. "How?" I kept my gaze pinned on Trey, delivering the final fatal strike. "You secretly drained the home equity line of credit on William's house 2 weeks ago," I announced, ensuring my voice carried to every corner of the room. "You wiped out the last liquidity this family possessed to cover your fraudulent tracks, and you did not even tell your father that you signed his financial death warrant." William whipped his head around to stare at Trey. The look of pure horror and boiling rage on the patriarch's face was spectacular. Trey stumbled backwards, stammering incoherent denials, but his panicked, guilty expression confirmed every single word I had just spoken. Madison let out a sharp, hysterical sob. She looked at Trey, then at William, her curated reality shattering into millions of jagged pieces on my marble floor. "You drained the house," she shrieked at her husband, her voice cracking. "You told me we were buying a villa in Malibu." I swiped the tablet screen one final time and turned my attention to the woman who had orchestrated my lifetime of misery. Diana was standing frozen, her mouth slightly open, her eyes darting frantically as she processed the total annihilation of her privileged existence. "You gave them $400,000 for their spectacular wedding," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper that cut directly to her core. "You bought them a house. You bought them cars. You poured every ounce of your love, your money, and your conditional approval into their golden lives. You pushed me down the stairs, you threw me out into the freezing rain, and you called me a pathetic failure because I did not fit your twisted narrative. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. Diana shrank back, finally recognizing the absolute power I held over her fate. Look exactly where your investment got you, Diana, I said, gesturing broadly to the three broken, terrified people standing around her. You backed a fraud, a thief, and a bankrupt tyrant. You are standing in the wreckage of your own terrible choices. And now you come crawling to the daughter you discarded, hoping I will act as your savior. I lowered the tablet, my posture perfectly straight, my expression carved from ice. You get nothing from me, I declared, my voice echoing with finality. You do not get my money. You do not get my forgiveness. You do not get my anger anymore. You are nothing to me but strangers trespassing on my property. My security team is waiting right outside those doors. Get out of my house, The silence following my command was heavy with their realization of possessing no leverage over me anymore. The shock quickly evaporated, replaced entirely by a terrifying blind rage. William's face transformed into a violently mottled purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his custom collar as he stepped forward, angry spit flying from his lips. He completely lost his polished veneer, revealing the cornered, desperate tyrant underneath. You ungrateful brat! William roared, his voice echoing violently. You owe us everything. I will drag you through courts until you bleed cash. No venture firm will ever take your calls again. I did not blink or retreat. I simply raised 2 fingers high. The heavy custom oak doors flanking the grand atrium swung open. Marcus and 3 armed security guards stepped into the room. They were massive, silent men, wearing black suits, moving with terrifying, predatory efficiency. Marcus did not wait for an invitation. He stepped directly between William and me, placing a massive, unyielding hand on my father's chest, stopping his forward momentum instantly. William tried to shove the hand away, but Marcus did not budge. Diana shrieked loudly, clutching Madison's arm as 2 guards flanked them, boxing the women in. Madison began to hyperventilate, pulling her hair as she realized this was not a negotiation, but a forced eviction. The pristine atrium dissolved into absolute chaos. William shouted empty legal threats, his voice cracking horribly. Diana sobbed, demanding someone call the police, completely forgetting she was trespassing on private property. The security team remained stoic and silent, gripping William by the arms and forcing him toward the front doors. It was a deeply humiliating removal, stripping them of their manufactured dignity. But in the midst of the screaming and shuffling bodies, something crucial went completely unnoticed. He had not defended his wife or father-in-law. Instead, using the chaotic struggle as a clever smokescreen, Trey took 3 silent steps backward, slipping behind a massive marble pillar. He knew he had exactly 60 seconds. Trey moved with the desperate speed of a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. His heart hammered loudly as he sprinted down the sunlit corridor branching off the atrium. He remembered watching my confident descent from the glass staircase. He calculated my primary workspace had to be at the top of that specific flight. He took the steps 2 at a time, his expensive shoes making barely a sound on the thick glass treads. His breath came in ragged, uneven gasps. He knew if caught wandering my private quarters, he could be arrested, compounding his legal problems. But the alternative was federal prison for his crypto fraud. He pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped directly into my home office. The room was impeccably organized, bathed in natural light from the massive windows. Trey's frantic, greedy eyes scanned the space, darting from the glowing security monitors to the custom mahogany desk. He rushed toward the desk, both hands shaking violently. He did not know what he was looking for, only that he desperately needed leverage. He needed a weapon. His eyes locked onto a thick leather-bound folder sitting openly next to my keyboard. The red confidential stamp blared across the cover page. Trey flipped the folder open. It was a formal term sheet. It outlined the exact financial details of a massive pending acquisition deal involving a global tech conglomerate. It listed proposed stock transfers, vesting schedules, proprietary algorithm integration plans, and the names of key executives involved in the secret negotiations. Trey pulled his smartphone from his pocket. His hands were sweating so heavily, he almost dropped the fragile device onto the floor. He unlocked the camera and hovered over the scattered documents. He snapped the first photo with a soft click. He flipped the thick page and took another. He meticulously photographed the financial disclosures, non-disclosure agreements, and structural transition plans. He captured exactly 6 pages of highly classified corporate intelligence. He quickly shoved the phone deep into his inner jacket pocket, just as the heavy double doors crashed open. A massive security guard stepped into the room, locking his cold eyes onto Trey. The guard moved with terrifying speed, grabbing Trey by his collar and violently yanking him away from the desk. Trey did not fight back. He allowed himself to be dragged out of the room down the sweeping staircase and forcefully marched through the atrium. He was thrown out the front doors, stumbling hard onto the white stone driveway and scraping his bare palms against the hot concrete. William, Diana, and Madison were already standing by the leased Porsche, flanked tightly by my security detail. Diana's expensive makeup was smeared, and William was breathing heavily, his face a miserable mask of impotent fury. "Get in the car," William barked, his voice hoarse. "We are leaving right now." Trey scrambled into the back seat next to a sobbing Madison. The heavy iron gates of my estate began to swing shut, sealing the compound and permanently severing them from the immense wealth they had tried to steal. William slammed his foot onto the accelerator, and the Porsche peeled out of the driveway, its tires screeching loudly against the stone. Inside the sweltering car, no one spoke. William gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, his mind racing with the reality of impending bankruptcy. Diana stared blankly out the window, her dreams of managing a massive fortune destroyed. Madison continued to weep into her hands, mourning the aesthetic she could no longer maintain. But in the back seat, Trey sat perfectly still. The panicked sweat had dried on his forehead. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his smartphone. He opened his photo gallery, confirming the clear images of my confidential term sheet were perfectly legible. A cold, predatory smile crept across his face. He opened his messaging app, selected William's contact name, and typed out a message. "I got it. I have the blueprint to destroy her and take everything." The flight back to Connecticut was a suffocating nightmare of absolute silence. William gripped the armrest, staring blankly ahead as the reality of his impending bankruptcy set in. Diana drank heavily, while Madison wept into her scarf. Trey did not care about their misery. He spent the flight locked in the lavatory, meticulously transcribing the blurry, hastily snapped photos of Tessa's confidential term sheet into an encrypted file on his laptop. He was sitting on a gold mine. Tessa was finalizing a massive multi-billion-dollar acquisition deal with Apex Global, the absolute largest tech conglomerate on the planet. When the hired car deposited them at William's heavily mortgaged estate, Trey immediately separated himself from the family wreckage. He ignored Madison's frantic questions and locked himself inside William's home office. He booted up his laptop and opened the transcribed files. The term sheet outlined a proprietary supply chain integration algorithm that Apex Global considered the holy grail of logistics. The document also listed 3 rival conglomerates that Tessa had rejected: Novus Dynamics Vanguard Systems and Zenith Corp. These companies had billions in capital and a desperate need to crush Apex Global's market dominance. Trey leaned back, his mind spinning with malicious calculation. His crypto fraud trial was looming. His IRS tax liens were suffocating him. He had stolen William's home equity and spent it on offshore accounts that were now frozen. He needed 8 figures of cash immediately to avoid prison. Tessa's code was the perfect lifeline. If he could sell the blueprints and the terms of the Apex deal to her rejected competitors, he could walk away with a massive consulting fee. Leaking the details would violate Tessa's non-disclosure agreements, imploding the Apex deal entirely. He would save his own life while completely destroying hers. He opened a secure email client, routing his connection through offshore virtual private networks to mask his location. He could not present himself as a brother-in-law. That was too easily dismissed as a family dispute. Instead, he crafted a new digital identity. He introduced himself as a disgruntled, silent co-founder of Tessa's platform, a shadow architect unfairly pushed out of the acquisition deal. He claimed to possess the complete source code for the logistics algorithm and the exact financial parameters of the Apex Global buyout. Trey sent targeted messages to the heads of acquisition at Novus Dynamics Vanguard Systems and Zenith Corp. He attached a highly redacted image from the stolen term sheet as proof of access. He demanded a $10 million consulting retainer in exchange for the full source code and the structural weaknesses of the Apex deal. He hit send, a greasy smile stretching across his face. He had outsmarted the sister-in-law who humiliated him. He leaned back, waiting for lucrative replies. 3,000 miles away in the climate-controlled server room of her Bel Air estate, Tessa stood with a steaming cup of coffee. Standing beside her was Marcus, her head of security, and Elena, her lead cybersecurity architect. Elena was typing rapidly on a glass monitor, tracking real-time data packets pinging across the globe. Tessa had not built a tech empire by leaving confidential documents lying around carelessly. Every piece of paper in her office was embedded with microscopic trace-encrypted digital watermarks. "Tessa, we have a localized security alert," Elena announced, her voice calm and purely analytical. "The honeypot file you left on your desk has been activated. A secondary tracker embedded in the physical ink has registered a high-resolution photographic capture. The image metadata was just uploaded to an encrypted server bouncing through a virtual private network in Switzerland. But the physical origin point is a residential IP address in Connecticut." Tessa took a slow sip of her coffee. "Show me the exact outgoing transmission log," she instructed. Elena brought up a complex web of routing nodes. The data packets were attempting to hide, but the tracking pixels embedded in the photographed document acted like a digital flare. Elena isolated the outgoing emails and intercepted the text. She displayed the message Trey had just sent to the rival conglomerates. Marcus crossed his massive arms, scowling at the screen. He is pitching himself as a disgruntled co-founder. He is attempting right now to extort $10 million from Zenith and Novus by offering them the fake supply chain algorithm we planted in the dummy folder. He is actively committing corporate espionage, wire fraud, and attempting to violate federal trade secret laws across international lines. "Do you want me to contact the FBI Cyber Division? We can have federal agents kicking down William's front door in Connecticut before midnight." Tessa looked at the screen, reading Trey's desperate words. He actually believed he was a master manipulator. He had walked right into the very simplest trap imaginable, completely blinded by his own greed and raging entitlement. He thought he was stealing the keys to the kingdom, unaware that he had just photographed a mathematically flawed algorithm designed to alert her the moment it was shared. He was sending corrupted data to ruthless tech billionaires who did not tolerate fraud. "No, do not call the authorities yet," Tessa said softly, a chilling smile spreading across her face. "Federal prison is far too sterile. If we arrest him now, William and Diana will simply pool their remaining pennies to hire a decent defense attorney. They will try to play the victim. I do not want Trey to face a judge yet. I want him to face the corporate monsters he just tried to scam." She set her coffee cup down on the server rack. "Let the emails go through. Let Novus Dynamics and Zenith Corp respond to him. Let him negotiate. Let him believe he has won. Once he attempts to sell them that corrupted code, they will realize he is a fraud trying to extort them today. They have private security teams that make the federal government look gentle. Let him dig his own grave." 3 days later, the crisp morning air of Los Angeles carried a deceptive calm. William was not waiting for Trey to save his sinking empire. He was launching a desperate, scorched earth offensive of his own. I had just stepped out of my favorite coffee roaster in Brentwood, holding a steaming latte and reviewing my morning schedule. It was my daily routine, an anchor of normalcy amidst the chaotic final stages of the Apex Global acquisition. I never saw the man approach. He appeared seemingly out of nowhere, stepping aggressively from behind a parked delivery van. He was wearing a badly fitted gray suit that smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. He moved with a practiced predatory swiftness, blocking my path to my car. "Tessa?" He asked, his voice sharp and loud enough to draw the attention of several people sitting on the coffee shop patio. I stopped, instantly assessing the threat level. My security team was parked half a block away, but the man did not reach for a weapon. Instead, he thrust a thick manila envelope directly at my chest. I raised my hand to catch it before it fell. "You have been served," the man announced with a smug theatrical finality. He immediately turned on his heel and marched quickly down the sidewalk, disappearing into the morning pedestrian traffic. I stood staring at the legal documents protruding from the envelope. The top page featured the bold letterhead of a notorious Los Angeles law firm, known specifically for handling frivolous extortion cases. Their reputation was built entirely on filing sensational, damaging claims to force rapid settlements from wealthy targets desperate to avoid bad press. I walked to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and placed my coffee in the cup holder. I locked the doors and pulled the documents from the envelope, the thick paper rustling loudly in the quiet cabin. The primary plaintiff was listed clearly at the top: William Vanguard. The sheer audacity of the claims printed on the pages was breathtaking. William had not just hired a shady lawyer, he had authorized a masterpiece of absolute fiction. The lawsuit officially accused me of breach of verbal contract and elder exploitation. I read through the dense legal jargon, my eyes scanning the fabricated timeline William had concocted. He was formally asserting, under penalty of perjury, that he had provided the initial seed capital for my software platform. He claimed that 5 years ago, he had given me a massive cash loan to launch my business, and in return, I had verbally promised him a 30% equity stake. It was a complete, unadulterated lie. William had never given me a single dime. He had actively mocked my business plan, calling it a pathetic waste of time before cutting me off entirely. But the truth did not matter to his aggressive new lawyer. The goal of this lawsuit was not to win in a courtroom. The goal was printed on the 4th page. William was demanding an immediate judicial injunction to freeze all of my personal and corporate assets pending a thorough financial discovery process. He knew exactly what he was doing. A sudden, massive lawsuit claiming ownership of my company's intellectual property and seeking an asset freeze would instantly trigger red flags in the Apex Global Compliance Department. A major tech conglomerate would never finalize a multi-billion-dollar acquisition if 30% of the company's equity was suddenly tied up in hostile litigation. William was holding a legal gun to the head of my buyout deal. My phone buzzed sharply in the passenger seat, vibrating against the leather upholstery. The screen displayed an incoming voicemail notification from an unknown Connecticut number. I tapped the screen, routing the audio through the car speakers. William's voice filled the quiet cabin. It was not the booming authoritarian bark he usually favored. It was a low, raspy sneer dripping with malicious confidence. He genuinely believed he had backed me into an inescapable corner. "Hello, Tessa," Williams said smoothly. "I assume you have just received my delivery. You thought you could humiliate me in your grand little mansion and simply banish me from your life. You thought you were untouchable because you secured a massive valuation, but you forgot who taught you how to play this game. I know exactly how fragile a corporate acquisition is. I know that the board of directors at Apex Global will panic the second my lawyers formally notify them that your company's equity is under strict judicial review." William paused, letting the heavy threat hang in the air. He was savoring his imagined victory, tasting the leverage he thought he finally possessed. "They will walk away. Tessa." William continued, his voice dropping into a deadly extortionist rhythm. "They will cancel the buyout and your billion-dollar dream will evaporate overnight. But I am a reasonable man. You have exactly 24 hours to transfer $10 million into a trust account controlled by my legal team. $10 million to save your precious acquisition. If that money is not wired by tomorrow morning, I will tie your company up in aggressive litigation for years. I will depose your executives, subpoena your source code, and bleed your resources dry until you have absolutely nothing left. Do the smart thing, Tessa. Pay your debt to your father." The voicemail clicked and ended, leaving the car in total silence. William was attempting to blackmail me for $10 million to save his own bankrupt real estate firm. He was holding my life's work hostage, threatening to detonate my acquisition out of pure greed. I stared at the dashboard, processing the venom of his strategy. He expected panic. He expected me to cave under the weight of his fabricated assault. Instead, a genuine, completely unbothered smile spread across my face. "Let him file his frivolous injunction," I whispered into the empty car. "Let him walk straight into the digital landmine Trey had already triggered." I merged into the Los Angeles traffic, leaving the process server behind. I headed straight for my corporate headquarters in Century City. William had fired his shot, unaware that he had brought a water pistol to a nuclear war. By the time I bypassed lobby security, my executive assistant had cleared my morning schedule and summoned my elite legal and financial team to the primary boardroom. I walked through the double doors and tossed the thick manila envelope onto the center of the polished mahogany table. My lead corporate counsel, David, picked up the documents and began to read. Beside him sat Evelyn, my chief financial officer, her eyes darting between my calm face and the lawsuit in his hands. I poured a glass of iced water and waited for the legal assessment. David flipped to the final page, let out a dismissive breath, and tossed the lawsuit back onto the table. "It is entirely frivolous," David announced, pushing his silver glasses up his nose. "The claims of a verbal contract for seed capital are fabricated. There is zero paper trail, no bank transfers, and absolutely no proof of elder exploitation. We can easily squash this in court, Tessa. I will file a motion to dismiss before lunch, and we can countersue for malicious prosecution." I took a sip of water. "How long will it take to get a judge to officially toss the injunction out?" I asked. David hesitated. "Given the current backlog in civil courts and the aggressive nature of his chosen law firm, it will take at least 6 months. They will file endless discovery motions to tie us up." Evelyn immediately stiffened, her financial instincts kicking into high gear. "We do not have 6 months," she interjected sharply. "Apex Global is conducting their final due diligence right now. If a judicial injunction freezes 30% of our equity for half a year, Apex will trigger the penalty clause and back out of the acquisition. We will lose the billion-dollar buyout." David leaned back, offering the standard risk-averse legal advice I paid him to provide. "We could negotiate a rapid settlement," David suggested cautiously. "If we pay him a fraction of his $10 million demand a nuisance fee, he signs a non-disclosure agreement and drops the injunction today. We clear the path for the Apex acquisition without risking the deal." I stared at David, my expression hardening into stone. "I do not pay extortionists," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet volume. "If I hand William a single dollar, I validate his delusion that he is responsible for my success. I am proving to him that his bullying tactics still work. I refuse to be held hostage by a desperate man. I am not going to wait 6 months for a judge to validate my ownership of my own company, and I am certainly not paying him a ransom to go away. We are changing the battlefield entirely." I turned to Evelyn, shifting the focus from legal defense to financial warfare. "Pull up William and his exact corporate debt structure," I commanded. Evelyn and her fingers flew across her keyboard, projecting a complex spreadsheet onto the massive digital display. The numbers were bathed in a harsh red glow, indicating severe financial distress. I stood up and walked toward the screen, analyzing the bleeding wounds of his failing real estate empire. He is heavily overleveraged on 2 commercial development projects in Boston and Chicago. Evelyn explained, highlighting specific rows of data. He took out massive short-term loans to fund construction, expecting to refinance once the buildings were occupied. But the projects are stalled, the properties are vacant, and the interest rates are compounding daily. His primary lenders are bleeding him dry. I studied the maturation dates on his highest-risk loans. "When do the balloon payments come due?" I asked. Evelyn checked the precise financial disclosures we gathered during our initial background checks. "The most aggressive notes, totaling $12 million, are held by a private equity firm in New York called Sterling Capital," Evelyn stated. "Those notes are officially in default. Sterling Capital is preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings by the end of the month. William is out of time. That is why he filed this lawsuit today. He needs cash immediately to stop the bank from seizing his assets." A sharp, predatory smile slowly broke across my face in the quiet room. William thought his aggressive litigation was his ultimate weapon. He failed to realize it was actually his suicide note. I turned and looked at my team. "We are not filing countersuits," I announced, silencing David before he could object. Legal battles take time, and William thrives on chaotic courtroom drama. I am going to attack his fatal weakness. I am going to completely buy out all of his toxic debt. I pulled my encrypted laptop from my leather briefcase and set it firmly on the mahogany table. I logged into my secure offshore banking portal, completely bypassing the corporate accounts tied to my company. Evelyn set up an anonymous proxy, limited liability company registered in Delaware. Immediately, I ordered, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Name it, Obsidian Holdings. Make sure the corporate shell is impenetrable and impossible to trace back to me." Evelyn nodded, executing the digital formation. "Done," she confirmed. I selected the secure routing numbers and typed in the transfer amount. I did not hesitate. I initiated a direct wire transfer of $15 million from my personal liquid capital into the newly minted Obsidian Holdings account. The transaction cleared instantly. "Now contact Sterling Capital," I instructed Evelyn, my voice ringing with authority. "Tell them Obsidian Holdings is offering to purchase his defaulted commercial debt portfolio for cash today. We are going to buy his loans, take control of his mortgages, and become his sole executioner." William wanted to hold my company hostage. Instead, I am going to legally repossess his entire life. Evelyn made the call on a heavily encrypted line, routing the connection through a secure server in Delaware to maintain the impenetrable facade of Obsidian Holdings. On the other end of the line was Richard Sterling, the notoriously ruthless managing partner of Sterling Capital. Richard was a man who traded in distressed assets and corporate misery, but even he sounded momentarily caught off guard by the sheer aggression of the offer. Evelyn did not negotiate. She simply stated that Obsidian Holdings was prepared to wire $12 million in clean, untraceable cash immediately to acquire the entirety of William Vanguard's defaulted commercial portfolio. Richard attempted to posture, citing the potential future value of the Boston and Chicago properties, but Evelyn cut him off with surgical precision. She listed the exact daily depreciation of the stalled construction sites and the pending municipal fines William had racked up recently. She offered him a clean exit from a rapidly sinking ship. Richard took the deal before she could finish her sentence. Within 48 hours, the massive gears of corporate finance ground into motion. Sterling Capital drafted the transfer agreements, eager to scrub the toxic Vanguard real estate loans from their quarterly reports. Tessa sat silently in her Century City boardroom, watching the digital confirmations roll across the massive monitor. She was officially absorbing the massive rotting carcass of her father's legacy. The $12 million wire transfer cleared without a single red flag disappearing into Sterling Capital's accounts. In exchange, Obsidian Holdings received the full legal rights to the commercial promissory notes. Tessa now held the literal deeds of trust for the Boston and Chicago properties. She owned the high-interest development loans that William had personally guaranteed. If William missed a single payment, which he already had for 3 consecutive months, Obsidian Holdings possessed the absolute legal authority to seize the properties and liquidate his entire failing corporate entity completely forever. But Tessa was not satisfied with merely holding William's professional life hostage. She wanted to tighten the noose around his personal throat. She instructed Evelyn to dig deeper into the Vanguard family's incredibly localized financial footprint. William had a history of hiding personal liabilities behind corporate shell games locally, and Tessa wanted every single hidden string pulled into the light. Evelyn deployed a team of forensic accountants to scrub all the regional banks in Connecticut, looking for the exact financial mechanism William was using to fund his aggressive, frivolous litigation against her. It did not take them very long to find the bleeding wound. Evelyn projected a new set of highly confidential banking records onto the boardroom monitor, her expression reflecting a mixture of professional disgust and deep, morbid fascination. "Tessa, you need to look at this right now," Evelyn said, pointing to a glaring anomaly in the personal banking history of William and Diana Vanguard. They have a primary mortgage on their Connecticut estate held by a mid-sized regional bank called Northeast Heritage. But there is a secondary attachment. A home equity line of credit was opened 8 months ago, completely maxed out to the absolute limit of $3 million. Tessa leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she analyzed the withdrawal history. The funds from the home equity line had not been used for home improvements or corporate stabilization. The entire $3 million had been systematically drained through a series of rapid, high-volume wire transfers to offshore cryptocurrency exchanges. The authorization signatures on those transfers did not match William or Diana Vanguard. They matched Trey. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with sickening clarity. Trey had secretly leveraged the Connecticut estate, draining William and Diana's primary residence of all its equity to fund his fraudulent cryptocurrency schemes. William was likely completely unaware that his home was leveraged to the breaking point, relying entirely on Trey to manage the secondary family accounts. Trey had effectively stolen the roof over his in-laws' actual heads, and the regional bank was beginning to panic. Northeast Heritage had flagged the account for suspicious activity and was preparing to issue a formal notice of default due to 90 days of missed minimum payments on the equity line. The regional bank was currently terrified of holding a highly toxic, unsecured $3 million bag. "Buy it right now," Tessa commanded, her voice cold and unyielding. "Buy the primary mortgage and the defaulted equity line. Offer Northeast Heritage a premium to offload the paper quietly and immediately. I want Obsidian Holdings to hold the absolute deed to the house William sleeps in." Evelyn nodded, picking up her phone to initiate the second wave of the financial strike. The regional bank executives at Northeast Heritage were practically weeping with relief when the anonymous representatives from Obsidian Holdings offered to purchase the Vanguard residential debt. Regional banks despise the bad optics of foreclosing on prominent local families. Offloading the messy defaulted loans to an anonymous corporate entity in Delaware was the perfect escape route. By Friday afternoon, the financial slaughter was complete. Tessa sat alone at her mahogany desk, reviewing the final stack of binding transfer documents. She ran her fingers over the crisp watermarked paper. Obsidian Holdings now legally owned the Boston commercial property. Obsidian Holdings owned the Chicago development site. Obsidian Holdings owned the primary mortgage on the Connecticut estate. Obsidian Holdings owned the massive defaulted home equity line that Trey had fraudulently drained. She had spent exactly $15 million of her own personal capital to completely encircle her abusers in an inescapable trap of debt and impending ruin. She had become the silent executioner holding the absolute power of financial life and death over her family. William believed he was the apex predator, dictating terms from a position of power completely oblivious to his impending doom. They would soon watch their entire kingdom crumble brick by brick, terrified by a faceless Delaware corporation, completely unaware that the architect of their destruction was the daughter they had cruelly thrown away. Trey sat in the suffocating darkness of his apartment, the glow of his laptop illuminating his bloodshot eyes. 3 days had passed since he sent the encrypted extortion emails to Tessa's rival tech conglomerates. The silence had been agonizing. His offshore accounts remained frozen, and his criminal defense attorney was demanding a massive retainer by Friday. He was contemplating the terrifying reality of federal prison when a single notification chimed. A new email appeared in his encrypted inbox. The sender address belonged to Pinnacle Ventures, a legendary venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. The subject line read simply, "Strategic Partnership and Logistics Acquisition." Trey opened the message, his heart hammering violently. The text was concise, professional, and dripping with corporate wealth. The managing partners at Pinnacle had reviewed the redacted algorithm framework he had illegally distributed. They were profoundly intrigued by his pitch as the ousted shadow architect of the Apex Global buyout. They were officially inviting him to their California headquarters to pitch his revolutionary tech portfolio in person. If the source code matched the preliminary projections, Pinnacle Ventures was prepared to offer an immediate seed investment of $5 million. Trey let out a sharp, breathless laugh that escalated into a manic howl. He had bypassed the system, outsmarted Tessa, and secured his golden parachute. The panic crushing his chest evaporated instantly, replaced by blinding, intoxicating arrogance. He slammed the laptop shut and grabbed his phone. He didn't hesitate. He drove his Porsche above the speed limit, tearing through Connecticut, until he reached William and Diana's estate. He burst through the heavy front doors without knocking, finding the family gathered in the formal living room. The atmosphere was miserable. William sat near the unlit fireplace, gripping a tumbler of scotch, his face gray with the mounting pressure of his collapsing real estate empire and the expensive legal fees required to maintain his frivolous lawsuit against Tessa. Diana was scrolling through a tablet while Madison sat on the velvet sofa, examining her nails with hollow detachment. Trey marched directly to the center of the room, vibrating with frantic, greedy energy. "Pack your bags," Trey ordered, his voice echoing loudly. "We are flying to San Jose tonight." William slowly lowered his glass, glaring at his son-in-law with exhausted irritation. "What absolute nonsense are you babbling about now?" William demanded. "I am bleeding cash to pay these aggressive litigation fees, and you want to go on a vacation." Trey flashed a predatory smile. He pulled his smartphone from his jacket pocket and projected the Pinnacle Ventures email directly onto the large smart television mounted above the mantel. "It is not a vacation," Trey corrected smoothly, pacing the floor like a conquering general. "I took the initiative. While you were paying bottom-feeding lawyers to file paperwork, I directly monetized Tessa's proprietary logistics data. I contacted the biggest venture capital firm in Silicon Valley, and they took the bait. They want the logistics algorithm I extracted from Tessa's office. They want to buy out the shadow architect." William stood up, his eyes locked onto the glowing $5 million figure displayed on the screen. The exhaustion lifted from his shoulders, instantly replaced by the familiar, ruthless greed that had driven his entire career. "You secured a direct pitch with Pinnacle?" William asked, his voice trembling. Trey nodded, wrapping his right arm around Madison's shoulders. "They want the entire portfolio. We pitch the code tomorrow morning. William, bring your corporate documents. We present a unified front. We show them we are a powerful family dynasty taking back our stolen intellectual property." Trey looked around the room, his eyes burning with absolute certainty. "We are going to get $5 million, crush Tessa in court, and take the rest." The promise of instant millions breathed vibrant life back into the Vanguard family. Diana abandoned her tablet, rushing upstairs to pack her most expensive designer suits, determined to project the image of a wealthy matriarch. Madison squealed with delight, calculating how much of the $5 million she could redirect into her failing lifestyle brand. William finished his scotch in one gulp, his chest puffed out with unearned pride. He believed his aggressive lawsuit had perfectly softened the ground for Trey's brilliant tactical strike. They moved with frantic speed, booking first-class tickets on the next commercial flight out of Hartford. During the long flight to California, they drank complimentary champagne and discussed their impending victory. William spent hours drafting a new aggressive list of demands for his lawyers, convinced the $5 million capital injection would allow him to bury Tessa in endless paperwork. He was vibrating with anticipation of walking back into her office, slapping the term sheet on her desk, and forcing her to surrender control entirely. Trey sat across the aisle, ignoring his wife's chatter about California real estate, lost in grandiose delusions. He pictured himself walking out of the federal courthouse, a free man, his legal debts erased, hailed as a Silicon Valley prodigy who brilliantly outmaneuvered the entire system. They did not consider the logistics of the code. They did not question the suspicious swiftness of the massive offer. They were completely blinded by their own desperate greed. The next morning, the California sun beat down on the streets of Silicon Valley. A black luxury SUV delivered William, Diana, Madison, and Trey to a towering glass skyscraper. The massive building gleamed like a crystal monolith against the sky. It was the true embodiment of supreme corporate power. Trey adjusted his silk tie, his posture radiating absolute arrogance. He led his family through the revolving glass doors and into a sprawling lobby lined with white marble. They walked past the turnstiles, moving with the entitlement of billionaires, arriving to collect their due. They stepped into the elevator, watching the floor numbers blur past as they ascended toward the executive penthouse suites. They stood shoulder to shoulder, smiling smugly at their reflections, completely unaware they were walking directly into a slaughterhouse. The Pinnacle Ventures boardroom was a staggering masterpiece of intensely intimidating corporate architecture. Suspended high on the top floor of the towering glass skyscraper, it offered a breathtaking panoramic, unobstructed view of Silicon Valley. Inside the perfectly climate-controlled room, a massive table carved from a single flawless slab of reclaimed redwood dominated the space. Trey sat proudly near the head of the long table, his rigid posture radiating unearned triumph. He poured premium sparkling water from a frosted glass carafe into a crystal tumbler, savoring the crisp sound of the carbonation. Beside him, Madison was busy snapping photos of the spectacular view and uploading them to her social media accounts, curating an aesthetic of sudden, effortless wealth. Diana adjusted the lapels of her white designer blazer, practically vibrating with eager anticipation. She leaned toward William, whispering excitedly about the luxury real estate market in California and how quickly they could relocate once the $5 million seed money cleared their accounts. William did not respond immediately. He was completely absorbed in his own arrogant delusions, staring out at the sprawling tech campuses below. He gripped a sleek digital stylus, actively calculating the exact sequence of aggressive lawsuits he would file against Tessa the moment Trey finalized the massive venture capital deal. They were a family entirely consumed by their own greed, basking in the glow of an impending victory they believed was absolute. The heavy, thick, frosted glass double doors at the far end of the boardroom clicked with a sharp, piercing electronic hum. The lock disengaged, and the doors swung outward with silent, hydraulic precision. The family immediately straightened their postures, transforming their faces into masks of polished corporate professionalism. Trey quickly buttoned his expensive suit jacket and stood up, preparing to extend a confident handshake to the legendary venture capitalists who were about to make him exceptionally wealthy. He completely froze. The air in the room seemed to violently evaporate. Tessa slowly walked through the open doors. She moved with terrifying, predatory grace, wearing an immaculate tailored charcoal power suit that commanded absolute authority. Her footsteps echoed like hammer strikes against the polished concrete floor. Flanking her on either side were two ruthless corporate litigators, David and Evelyn, carrying thick leather briefcases and wearing expressions of complete, unyielding dominance. They did not look like executives preparing to negotiate a seed investment. They looked like an execution squad. The silence in the boardroom became instantly suffocating. William dropped his stylus, the small metal tool clattering loudly against the redwood table. Diana let out a sharp, involuntary gasp, her manicured hand flying to cover her mouth. Madison quickly lowered her phone, her curated smile melting into a mask of pure confusion. Trey remained standing, his arms still awkwardly half extended for a handshake that would never happen. His pale face drained of all color, transforming from a portrait of arrogant triumph into a canvas of absolute panic. His eyes darted frantically toward the hallway, desperately searching for the real executives. He simply could not comprehend the impossible reality standing directly in front of him. "What are you doing here?" Trey stammered weakly, his trembling voice cracking horribly under the crushing heavy weight of sudden absolute dread. Tessa did not answer him immediately. She walked methodically to the heavy leather chair at the absolute head of the redwood table. She finally sat down, her fluid movements smooth and deliberate. She leaned back against the leather, placing her elbows on the armrests and steepling her fingers together. She locked her cold, unrelenting gaze directly onto Trey's terrified face. "I own this firm, Trey," Tessa said, her voice dropping into a deadly, quiet cadence. "You are pitching to me." The words struck the room like a physical shockwave. Trey collapsed backward into his chair, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. William slammed his hands flat against the table, refusing to accept the catastrophic shift in reality. "This is a trick," William roared, his face mottling with furious purple rage. "You do not own Pinnacle Ventures. This is a legendary Silicon Valley institution. You are a glorified software developer. I demand to speak to the managing partners immediately. We have a scheduled pitch for a $5 million acquisition, and I will not let you interfere with our transaction." David, Tessa's lead litigator, calmly opened his leather briefcase. He extracted a single crisp sheet of paper and slid it across the redwood table until it stopped directly in front of William. Pinnacle Ventures was acquired by Apex Global 3 years ago. David stated, his tone clinically detached. It operates as a wholly owned subsidiary of the Apex portfolio. As the incoming chief executive officer of the newly merged Apex Global Logistics Division, Tessa holds absolute, undisputed authority over all Pinnacle Venture Capital distributions. You are currently sitting in her building. Trey began to hyperventilate. The confident, brilliant digital architect he had pretended to be was completely shattering into a million jagged pieces. The luxurious California dream was dying right in front of his eyes. But the emails, Trey gasped, his hands gripping his hair tightly as he stared across the table. "I negotiated with the senior acquisition team. They personally reviewed the logistics algorithm. They offered me $5 million for the source code." Tessa leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into dark, lethal slits. "There was no acquisition team," Trey, Tessa replied, delivering the final fatal blow. "You were emailing my internal cybersecurity division. You took a photograph of a honeypot document sitting openly on my desk. You stole a completely fabricated, mathematically corrupted algorithm designed specifically to track hostile corporate espionage. You then willingly transmitted that stolen, worthless data across state lines using an illegal offshore proxy server in a pathetic attempt to extort my global competitors. You willingly committed wire fraud, criminal corporate espionage, and federal theft of proprietary trade secrets. You walked right into my trap because you were far too arrogant to realize you were the prey." Tessa remained seated, her posture radiating absolute dominance. Before William could roar in outrage, and before Trey could formulate an excuse, Tessa raised her hand. The gesture was slight, but it instantly silenced the room. David, her litigator, stepped forward and dropped 3 thick leather folders onto the center of the redwood table. The thud echoed like a gavel striking a block. Tessa leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Trey with the precision of a predator. "We are not going to debate your corporate espionage, Trey," she announced smoothly. "The federal authorities are already reviewing the server logs. Right now, we are going to discuss exactly how you have been funding this pathetic illusion of a billionaire lifestyle." Tessa reached out and flipped open the first thick folder. She slid a high-resolution printout across the table. It came to rest perfectly between William and Madison. It was a copy of a cashier's check. The amount was clearly printed $400,000. Madison stared at the document, her perfectly contoured face contorting in confusion. William immediately stiffened, recognizing his own signature on the bottom line. "That is the exact check I gave you for the wedding expenses," William stated, his voice dropping into a dangerous, gravelly tone. He looked at Trey, his eyes narrowing. "You told me the venue required a massive upfront deposit and you needed liquid cash to bypass the vendor holds." Tessa smiled, a sharp, razor-thin expression devoid of any warmth. "He lied," William, Tessa stated, her voice slicing through the heavy air of the boardroom. "The luxurious destination wedding was not paid for with that check. Look at the routing numbers on the back of the endorsement." David stepped forward, projecting the corresponding banking data onto the massive digital display screen mounted on the wall. The harsh white light of the spreadsheet illuminated Trey's pale, sweating face. The $400,000 did not go to a wedding planner, a florist, or a luxury resort. Tessa explained, her words landing like physical blows. "The minute William handed you that money, you wired it directly into a fraudulent offshore cryptocurrency exchange registered in the Cayman Islands." Madison turned to her husband, her eyes wide with mounting terror. "Trey, what is she talking about?" Madison demanded, her voice trembling. Why did you send our wedding money offshore? Trey swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. He adjusted his silk tie, desperately trying to summon his usual arrogant charm. It was a bridge loan, Maddie, he stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the room. I was temporarily leveraging the wedding funds to secure a massive return on a decentralized finance token. It is standard venture capital strategy. I paid for the wedding myself. Tessa let out a short, dismissive laugh. You did not pay for a single floral arrangement, Tessa corrected, her tone laced with absolute disgust. You funded the entire wedding by secretly leveraging William's stolen credit. You opened a $3 million home equity line of credit against the Connecticut estate, forged William and Diana's authorization signatures, and used their own money to pay for the extravagant wedding you claimed to be funding yourself. You maxed out their equity line to maintain your fraudulent lifestyle while simultaneously funneling the $400,000 cash check to your extremely angry investors. William gripped the edge of the redwood table so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. You leveraged my house, William roared, the veins bulging in his neck. You stole equity from my primary residence to pay for a party. Diana let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying to her chest as she realized the true extent of their financial exposure. Trey jumped to his feet, knocking his heavy leather chair backward. It crashed against the glass wall. She is lying, Trey shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Tessa. She fabricated these banking documents to tear us apart. She is trying to ruin my reputation because she is jealous of my success. The crypto fund is entirely solvent. My investors are thrilled with their returns. You cannot believe a word this vindictive woman says. Tessa did not raise her voice. She simply tapped a single key on her laptop. The boardroom's high-fidelity surround sound system instantly crackled to life. A recorded voicemail began to play, filling the large room with the undeniable pathetic sound of Trey's voice. The recording was frantic, breathless, and dripping with absolute terror. Listen to me, Marcus. You have to give me until Friday. The recorded voice of Trey begged, the audio crystal clear. I know the token crashed. I know the liquidity pool is empty. But my father-in-law just handed me a $400,000 check. I am wiring it to your account right now. Just do not go to the authorities. Do not tell the other investors. I am marrying the Vanguard girl this weekend, and I will have full access to their corporate accounts by next month. I will make everyone whole. I swear to God, Marcus, just give me 72 hours. The audio file clicked off, plunging the boardroom into a suffocating dead silence. The absolute truth hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. Trey stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. His grand illusion had been completely annihilated. Madison stared at her husband, her face quickly draining of all color. The curated perfect life she had proudly displayed to the world was a complete sham. The luxury cars, the designer clothes, the extravagant vacations, none of it was real. She had married a desperate fraud who had stolen from her own parents to maintain a pathetic facade. A hysterical sob ripped from Madison's throat. She collapsed forward onto the heavy table, burying her face in her hands. Her perfectly styled hair fell around her shoulders as she wept uncontrollably, her entire reality shattering into pieces. She screamed Trey's name, her voice cracking with raw, utter humiliation and fury. Madison's hysterical sobs echoed against the glass walls of the penthouse boardroom, a chaotic soundtrack to the destruction of her carefully curated existence. She clutched her designer handbag to her chest, rocking in the heavy leather chair, broken by the realization that her husband was a desperate, penniless fraud. Trey remained frozen, his eyes glued to the display screen projecting his pathetic voicemail. He looked like a man standing on the gallows watching the lever being pulled. Tessa offered no comfort. Her face remained a mask of flawless composure. She had spent her entire life shrinking to make these people comfortable swallowing their insults. That era was permanently over. She turned her icy gaze away from the weeping couple and fixed it onto William and Diana. They were paralyzed, staring at Trey with profound disgust and mounting panic. William was breathing heavily, his mind struggling to process the sudden evaporation of his lifeline. Tessa did not let them speak. She placed her hand on the second leather folder resting on the redwood table. She pushed it across the polished surface. It glided to a halt directly in front of her father. William stared at this dark leather cover, as if it were a live explosive. He hesitated, hands trembling slightly before flipping it open. Inside sat a stack of legal documents stamped with the official seals of Sterling Capital and Northeast Heritage Bank. The top page prominently displayed the bold logo of Obsidian Holdings. David, Tessa's lead litigator, stepped forward to provide the clinical translation. Obsidian Holdings is an anonymous proxy firm registered in Delaware. David stated, his voice ringing with authority. It was established solely for the purpose of acquiring distressed assets. 3 days ago, Obsidian Holdings approached your primary commercial lenders. We purchased the entirety of your defaulted commercial debt portfolio. We now hold the exclusive promissory notes for your stalled development projects in Boston and Chicago. Furthermore, we acquired the primary mortgage and the defaulted maxed-out home equity line of credit attached to your residential estate in Connecticut. William's face drained of the last remaining drop of color. He looked up from the documents, his eyes wide with suffocating terror. He looked at David, then at Evelyn, and finally at his daughter. "You sued me for equity because you claimed you built me," Tessa said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet volume that demanded absolute attention. "You filed a frivolous lawsuit claiming a verbal contract for seed capital. You told the world that I owed you my success. But the undeniable truth is that you are entirely insolvent, and I own you." Diana gasped, her hand flying to her throat, her designer bracelets clinking loudly in the silent room. Tessa leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table. "You thought you were flying to Silicon Valley to secure a massive venture capital investment. You convinced yourselves that you were going to walk out of this skyscraper with $5 million, crush me in federal court, and violently seize control of my global logistics network. But there is no $5 million. There is no corporate rescue package. I instructed my cybersecurity team to bait Trey with a fake algorithm precisely because I knew his arrogance would blind him to the trap. While you were busy booking first-class flights to California to celebrate your impending victory, I used $15 million of my own personal liquid capital to completely buy out your toxic debt." William opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The aggressive, domineering patriarch who had bullied Tessa for 3 decades was completely gone, replaced by a broken, terrified old man staring at the absolute ruin of his empire. "Your commercial loans were severely in default," Tessa continued, her tone relentless and precise. "Sterling Capital was thrilled to offload your garbage assets for cash. As the sole proprietor of Obsidian Holdings, I executed my legal right to call the loans due immediately. Your real estate development company is officially bankrupt as of 9 o'clock this morning. My legal team has already filed the liquidation paperwork in federal court. Your corporate accounts are frozen. Your construction sites are being seized by my asset management team right now." Tessa did not pause to let the reality settle. She delivered the final devastating blow. "And regarding your Connecticut estate," Tessa added, her eyes locking directly onto her mother. "Because Trey fraudulently drained your home equity line to the maximum limit, and because you failed to make the minimum payments for 90 consecutive days, Northeast Heritage Bank was legally preparing to foreclose. I simply purchased the paper and accelerated the timeline. I am foreclosing on your house. You have exactly 30 days to vacate the premises before the local sheriff physically removes you and your belongings from the property." The sheer magnitude of the destruction finally broke through Diana's carefully maintained facade. The wealthy, judgmental matriarch who had spent her entire life prioritizing social status over her own daughter's well-being completely shattered. Diana let out a wailing sob. Her knees buckled and she slid out of her heavy leather chair, dropping directly onto the polished concrete floor of the boardroom. "Tessa, please." Diana wept loudly, crawling forward on her knees until she reached the edge of the redwood table. Her pristine white blazer was wrinkled, her makeup smearing down her cheeks in dark, wet streaks. You cannot do this to us. We are your parents. We are your family. Please, Tessa, have mercy. Where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to live? You have so much money. You do not need to destroy our home. Please help us. Tessa looked at the weeping woman groveling on the floor. She felt no satisfaction, no joy, absolutely no pity. She felt only a profound, liberating emptiness. She looked at her mother deadpan, her expression devoid of human warmth. You said I did not deserve any help, Tessa stated. Now neither do you. Diana remained crumpled on the polished concrete floor, her expensive white blazer stained with her own tears, her manicured hands grasping at the empty air. William simply stared at his wife, his chest heaving, his mind completely incapable of processing the absolute obliteration of his legacy. The deafening silence was shattered by the sharp electronic hum of the frosted glass doors disengaging. The hydraulic hinges hissed, swinging the massive doors outward to reveal two imposing figures stepping directly into the room. They wore dark suits, and clipped to their belts were the gold shields of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Trey let out a strangled gasp, scrambling backward until his spine collided violently with the glass wall overlooking the city. The two federal agents moved with terrifying precision, bypassing William and Diana entirely. They walked straight toward Trey, their heavy footsteps echoing like a ticking clock, marking the final seconds of his fraudulent life. Tessa did not even blink. She remained still, watching the inevitable conclusion of her constructed trap. Trey Stanford, the lead agent, announced, his voice booming with unquestionable authority. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, interstate transmission of stolen proprietary data, and criminal corporate espionage. You have the right to remain silent. Trey raised his hands, shaking uncontrollably, his eyes darting toward Tessa in a desperate plea for a mercy he did not deserve. This is a misunderstanding, Trey stammered, his voice cracking. I am a venture capitalist. I am marrying into the Vanguard family. I am a legitimate digital architect. Tessa finally stood up, commanding the space as she walked slowly toward him. You are a common thief, Tessa corrected, her tone completely devoid of emotion. I forwarded the server logs to the cybercrime division at 7 exactly this morning. They have the time-stamped digital footprints of your illegal proxy server. They have the corrupted honeypot algorithm you blindly stole from my internal network. They have the authentic term sheets you photographed on my desk, which you attempted to sell to my overseas competitors. You left a digital trail so obvious that my security analysts tracked your every move for 3 months. The second agent forcefully grabbed Trey's wrist, pulling his arm behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking into place echoed through the room. Madison shrieked, the sound tearing through her throat. She lunged forward, clawing at the air, but David stepped into her path, blocking her from interfering with a federal arrest. Madison collapsed, sobbing hysterically, as she watched her husband being marched toward the exit. Her curated California dream had turned into a spectacular nightmare. The golden child of the family was now tethered to a federally indicted felon. Her impending marriage was destroyed, her reputation annihilated, and her wealth exposed as a criminal illusion. Take him out of my building, Tessa ordered, not breaking eye contact with the man in handcuffs. As the FBI agents escorted Trey through the glass doors, 4 uniformed security guards entered the boardroom. They moved swiftly, taking positions directly behind William and Diana. William slowly dragged himself out of his chair, the arrogant posture he had maintained for decades completely broken. He reached down and helped his weeping wife to her feet. Diana could not even look at Tessa. She hid her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as the security guards flanked them. You are trespassing on private corporate property, David stated, pointing toward the open doors. You will be escorted to the ground floor. Do not attempt to return to this building. Your access credentials have been permanently revoked. William hesitated, his eyes meeting Tessa's one final time. He searched her face for any trace of the daughter he had marginalized, any hint of the scapegoat he bullied. He found only the untouchable gaze of a chief executive officer who had dismantled his entire world. William lowered his head, accepting his absolute defeat, and walked slowly toward the exit. Diana and Madison followed a broken procession of ruined aristocrats escorted out of the fortress by silent guards. The heavy glass doors hissed shut, locking with a definitive, satisfying click. Tessa stood alone in the center of the massive boardroom. The suffocating tension completely vanished, replaced by a pristine silence. She let out a slow breath, rolling her shoulders back. She walked methodically to the espresso machine resting on the credenza near the far wall. She placed a small ceramic cup under the spout, the rich aroma filling the space as the dark liquid poured out. Picking up the delicate cup, she walked toward the tall glass window. The bright golden landscape of Silicon Valley stretched out before her, a limitless horizon of glass, steel, and opportunity. She took a deliberate sip of the bitter espresso, savoring the warmth as it flooded her chest. For the first time in 30 years, she did not feel the crushing weight of her family's expectations. She did not feel the lingering sting of their insults or the toxic burden of their demands. She felt completely, undeniably free for the first time. A sharp vibration in her pocket broke the silence. Tessa pulled out her smartphone. The screen illuminated with a secure, encrypted message from her lead acquisitions team. The text was brief, clinical, and spectacular. The wire transfer has cleared federal holding. The acquisition is finalized. $150 million has been successfully deposited into the primary holding account. Tessa stared at the glowing numbers on the screen. The grueling late nights, the constant anxiety, the endless battles to prove her worth, it had all culminated in this exact second. She had won. She had beaten them all, not by playing their twisted games, but by simply outsmarting them. She turned her phone off and slid it back into her pocket. She took another sip of espresso, tracking a solitary airplane soaring high above the tech campuses below. A genuine smile spread across her face.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river. Years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter. In every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter. In things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.